One day, God, or Lord as most commonly referred to in the Old Testament, asks Abram to leave his country and people, travel to the land of Canaan, and establish a new tribe there. According to the Old Testament, at the age of 75, Abram heeds this call, setting out on this journey with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot. After a long journey, they arrive in the promised land of Canaan, where they are told that this land is chosen for them and granted to their lineage. But the land of Canaan was already inhabited by various Canaanite tribes before he arrived. These tribes are mentioned in several passages of the Old Testament. The most frequently mentioned Canaanite tribes are the Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, Jebusites, Perizzites, and Girgashites. The Canaanites were a diverse group of people with their own distinct cultures and languages. They were primarily agriculturalists, but they also engaged in trade and other economic activities. The Canaanites were also known for their religious practices, which included polytheism. The biblical narrative does not provide a specific date for his arrival in Canaan, but it is generally believed to have taken place in the early 2nd millennium BC. The relationship between him and the Canaanites is complex and often fraught with tension. In some passages, the Canaanites are portrayed as hospitable and welcoming to him and his family, while in other passages they are portrayed as hostile and antagonistic. Despite the challenges he faced, he eventually established himself and his family in Canaan. At the age of 99, Abram makes a covenant with the Lord, and his name is changed to Abraham. Abraham dies at the age of 175 and is buried in the cave of Machpelah near the city of Hebron, located in today's West Bank. Abraham had 2 sons. One was Isaac, and the other was Ishmael. Isaac is regarded as the ancestor of the Jews, while Ishmael is considered the ancestor of the Arabs. These brothers share the same father, but have different mothers. Isaac was born to Sarah, while Ishmael was born to Hagar. Isaac, around the age of 60, is granted a son even though his wife is barren. His name is Jacob. Jacob, by the Lord, is given the name Israel. The 12 sons of Jacob are the first generation of the children of Israel, or the Israelites. The lineages of these 12 sons eventually form the 12 tribes of Israel. According to the narrative in the Old Testament, under the leadership of Joseph, one of Jacob's 12 sons, Israelites entered Egypt. Initially, they lived in peace and security in Egypt, since Joseph had attained a significant position in the Egyptian administration. However, as the regime in Egypt changed, so did their situation in the country. The population of Israelites was increasing, and the new pharaoh started to feel uneasy about them. Israelites experienced a period of great oppression in Egypt. They believed they were chosen and blessed by God. Despite this, they were enslaved and subjugated by the polytheistic, idol-worshipping people of Egypt, forced to work to death in the cities of Pharaoh, who claimed divinity for himself. This continued until a savior sent by God arrived. That savior was Moses. God instructed Moses to go to Pharaoh and lead Israelites out of Egypt. According to the Old Testament, the Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. They had stayed in Egypt for 430 years. The 10 Commandments were also revealed to Israelites through Moses. According to the Old Testament, The first of the Ten Commandments formed the foundation of Jewish belief, which is the oneness of God or monotheism. Jewish culture developed based on this divine command. Therefore, the Ark of the Covenant, which contained the Ten Commandments and other revelations given to Moses, became the most valued possession and symbol of the Jewish people. Under the command of Joshua, who succeeded Moses, Israelites carried the Ark of the Covenant, their most sacred relic, as they conquered Canaan. They fought against idol-worshipping tribes, and their rallying cry was, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Under Joshua, Israelites battled idol-worshipping factions in Canaan, a struggle lasting generations due to their tribal division. Lacking a central state, they rallied around religious judges during wars. Their plea for monarchy led Samuel to appoint Saul as king, initiating Israel's monarchy, which saw victories. Yet it was David, a Judahite, not Saul's descendant, who founded Israel's first dynasty, elevating its power unprecedentedly. He conquered the city of Jerusalem and made it the capital. King David engaged in conflict with various tribes, including the Philistines, who hailed from the Aegean area, likely modern-day Crete, and settled in Canaan around 1175 BC. They inhabited a strategically valuable coastal region of Canaan, extending from Gaza in the south to Tel Qasil, close to what is now Tel Aviv. This region was particularly fertile and lay along a vital international trade corridor. Their urban centers were 5 main cities: Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath, situated along Canaan's southern coast. In the most famed clash, David faced off against the Philistine giant Goliath during an extensive conflict between the two nations. He was successful not only militarily, but also diplomatically. During David's time, the territories controlled by the Israelites expanded from the Sinai Peninsula in the south to the Euphrates River in the north. One of David's biggest ambitions was to build a grand temple to house the Ark of the Covenant, which had been carried on backs or hidden away in obscure places until then. However, this task fell to his son, Solomon. Solomon commissioned a magnificent temple in Jerusalem, where the Ark of the Covenant was placed. After centuries of migrations, wars, and chaos, Israelites found prosperity, peace, and security. They would never again attain the peace and security they had during the reigns of David and Solomon. On the contrary, the nation would first be torn from within, then crushed by their enemies. Upon Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam ascended to the throne. However, Rehoboam's leadership was met with resistance, particularly due to his refusal to lighten the tax burden as demanded by Jeroboam and the people, leading to the division of the united monarchy into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah around 931 BC. The 10 northern tribes made Jeroboam their king, while only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin remained under Rehoboam's rule alongside the Levites. The division resulted in a period of political instability and conflict, with both kingdoms experiencing various degrees of prosperity and challenge. This separation marked the beginning of 2 distinct political entities: the northern kingdom, with its capital eventually in Samaria, and the southern kingdom, which continued to have its capital in Jerusalem. In 722 BC, Samaria was invaded by the Assyrians. With this invasion, 10 tribes living in the northern kingdom of Israel gradually vanished from the historical stage. Most were exiled and assimilated, losing their identities wherever they went. From that day on, they were referred to as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom of Judah, governed by the lineage of David, lasted longer. In 587 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded Jerusalem, overthrowing the kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem was razed to the ground, and more importantly, the temple built by Solomon was destroyed. Most Jews were enslaved and exiled to Babylon. This period of captivity lasted 50 years until the Persian conquest of Babylon. Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, issued a decree in 538 BC that allowed the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, effectively granting them the status of a self-governing province within the Achaemenid Persian Empire. This strategy was designed to secure the loyalty of his new citizens by honoring their cultural and religious customs. For the first time in history, a nation was returning to its homeland. The recovery following the return took 70 years, culminating in 458 BC with the rise of Ezra, a priest. Ezra, along with his assistant Nehemiah, began rebuilding Solomon's temple, which had been in ruins for about 150 years. This marked the beginning of what is known in Jewish history as the Second Temple period. During most of this period, Jews lived under foreign rule. The only period of independence during the Second Temple period came with the Hasmonean kingdom, established following the Maccabean revolt, historically known as the Maccabean Uprising. The revolt, which erupted in 167 BC, was a Jewish rebellion against the Seleucid Empire and its Hellenistic influence, particularly under King Antiochus IV. Antiochus's imposition of foreign customs and religion, including a ban on Jewish practices and desecration of the temple, sparked widespread dissent. The revolt was catalyzed when Mattathias, a Jewish priest, refused to perform a pagan sacrifice and killed a fellow Jew who did so, as well as a Seleucid official. This act of defiance led to an open rebellion led by Mattathias and his sons, known as the Maccabees. The rebellion didn't just remain an uprising, it succeeded in liberating Jerusalem from pagan invaders and achieved success in a short span of time. In 164 BC, the traditional festival of Hanukkah was celebrated in the Temple of Jerusalem, which had been cleansed of all pagan gods and symbols. Jews refer to this as a pure festival. In 63 BC, Roman commander Pompey captured Jerusalem and overthrew the Hasmonean state, marking the end of the last independent Jewish kingdom in history. From that point on, until the 7th century AD, with a few brief interruptions, the land was governed by the Romans. Initially, the relationship between Rome and the province of Judea and its Jewish inhabitants was unproblematic. A minor Jewish revolt that occurred in 53 BC was suppressed by Rome. This revolt did not significantly damage relations, but over time, relations between the two sides deteriorated. The crucifixion of Jesus, a Jewish preacher who was seen by his followers as the Messiah, in the early 1st century AD, further complicated Jewish-Roman relations. While the event itself was part of a broader pattern of Roman responses to perceived challenges to their authority, it also had particular consequences for the Jewish community. Following the crucifixion, tensions between the Jewish leadership, who were concerned about maintaining the peace with Rome, and the growing number of Jesus followers, who were predominantly Jewish at the time, began to rise. These internal divisions added to the already complex dynamics of Judean society under Roman rule. By the year 66 AD, the Jews initiated a major revolt, which soon escalated into the First Jewish-Roman War. The Romans were militarily and technologically superior to the Jews, but the province of Judea was quite far from the empire's center, making logistical support challenging. Consequently, the wars between the Romans and Jews continued for 7 years. In the summer of 70 AD, Emperor Titus entered Jerusalem after a long siege, destroying the city's walls and the city itself once again. The Second Temple also fell victim to the destruction. A large portion of the Jews in the city were killed, and the remaining 97,000 Jews were captured, enslaved, and taken to Rome. About 30,000 of these were settled in Carthage. According to historian Josephus, those who managed to escape dispersed to the eastern Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. History repeated itself, and the Jews were exiled once again, this time by another empire. The Arch of Titus in Rome, built after Emperor Titus's death in 81 AD, celebrates the victory of Vespasian and Titus in the Jewish War. Its relief depicts the spoils taken from Jerusalem's temple, including the menorah and showbread table. Israel adopted the menorah as its emblem in 1949, inspired by the arch's imagery. Sometime after the capture of Jerusalem in 70 AD, a Roman colony was established on the city's ruins, Aelia Capitolina. The first Jewish-Roman wars completely ended in 73 AD. The Roman policy of enslavement led to a decrease in the Jewish population in the region, but a considerable number of Jews continued to live in and around Jerusalem. However, a new unrest, called Bar Kokhba Revolt, that broke out in 132 AD, would change this situation. Now, a massive temple of Jupiter stood where the former temple had been, and the city had essentially turned into a Roman military garrison. Roman historian Cassius Dio described the scene after the revolt. 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus, nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate. The consequences of the Bar Kokhba revolt were indeed devastating for the Jews. Jewish war prisoners were recaptured by the Romans and sold as slaves. Jews were prohibited from entering Jerusalem except on certain religiously significant days. Following the conflicts between the Jews and Rome, Emperor Hadrian renamed the Judean province to Syria-Palestina. This designation was derived from the Philistines, historic adversaries of the Israelites, as a strategy to diminish Jewish association with the territory. Additionally, as a result of the wars, the number of Jews voluntarily migrating from Judea significantly increased. Jewish prisoners and their children who were sold as slaves were later freed and joined local free communities. When Islamic armies conquered Palestine in 638 AD, the Jewish population was approximately 150,000. However, they were still prohibited from entering Jerusalem. Caliph Omar lifted this ban upon capturing the city. After 500 years, Jews regained the freedom to settle in Jerusalem. Although some restrictions were imposed over time, these did not significantly limit Jewish freedoms. Nevertheless, High taxes, particularly on agricultural lands, led many Jews to migrate from rural areas to cities and ultimately to emigrate from the country. By the end of the 11th century, the Jewish population in Palestine had decreased significantly. The Crusaders seized Jerusalem in 1099, marking an era of heightened persecution and violence against Jews during the Crusades. European Jewish communities, particularly along the Rhine and Danube, suffered devastating attacks. This violence spread fear as far as Jewish communities in the Middle East. In Haifa, Jewish and Muslim forces united against the Crusaders, yet faced mass slaughter upon the city's defeat. The Crusaders spared no one, taking the lives of all they encountered, regardless of age or faith, including Jewish and Muslim women and children. Similarly, in Jerusalem, Jews and Muslims fought together. The Crusaders destroyed a synagogue, and after Jerusalem's fall, surviving Jews faced execution, forced conversion, or ransom. Due to migrations or exiles spanning thousands of years, Jews dispersed to various parts of the world. Jews who migrated to Germany and northeastern France were named Ashkenazi, those in Spain and Portugal, Sephardic, in Egypt, Iraq, and Yemen, Mizrahi, and in Central Asia and the Caucasus, Bukharan. Notably, many Ashkenazi Jews from Europe crossed the ocean during the 17th and 18th centuries to settle in America. The Middle Ages witnessed pogroms against Jewish communities in Europe, and their fate was often at the mercy of shifting political dynamics. During the Renaissance, Jewish scholars were instrumental in conveying ancient wisdom to Europe's burgeoning intellectual societies. However, the Age of Enlightenment introduced new kinds of anti-Semitism, compelling Jews to tread a fragile path throughout Europe. In the Ottoman Empire, which seized control of Jerusalem in 1516, Jews enjoyed a level of prosperity and were influential in commerce, trade, and even held high offices such as that of Sanjak Bey, a governorship typically reserved for Muslims. Notably, Sultan Bayezid II welcomed the Sephardic Jews who were expelled from Spain and Portugal following the Alhambra Decree of 1492. The Ottomans allowed these Jews to settle in the wealthier cities of the empire, significantly in areas such as Istanbul, Salonika, and Jerusalem, amongst others. These communities thrived and significantly influenced the cultural and social fabric of the Ottoman Empire, forming a vital part of its diverse population. For instance, David Ben-Gurion, the founder of the State of Israel, and Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, its longest-serving president, studied in Istanbul University. However, they were obligated to pay the jizya, a specific tax imposed on non-Muslim citizens, and they also faced some restrictions. In 1860, Jewish journalist Theodor Herzl suggested that Jews should depart Europe to avoid anti-Semitism and the risk of cultural assimilation, advocating for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. He published Der Judenstaat, laying out his vision for a Jewish homeland, which quickly brought him to prominence in the Jewish world. Herzl convened the first Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897 and tried to gain support for a Jewish state by approaching leaders like German Emperor Wilhelm II and Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid II, though unsuccessfully. The movement gained momentum in the early 20th century, particularly after the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which supported the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine then an Ottoman region with a small minority Jewish population. But Arthur James Balfour, known for the Balfour Declaration, is often noted for his anti-Semitic views. In 1905, he supported the Aliens Act, designed to curb the immigration of Russian Jews to Britain, citing them as undesirable. Balfour's advocacy for a Jewish homeland in Palestine was partly influenced by his preference to not have Jewish individuals in British society. He regarded Zionism as a means to ease the historical discomfort that the Jewish presence had ostensibly caused in Western civilization, a presence which he felt Europe could neither fully expel nor assimilate. Following World War I, the defeat of the Ottoman Empire led to Palestine coming under British administration as part of the League of Nations mandate system. This era, known as the British Mandate, witnessed a surge in Jewish immigration to the region and escalating conflicts among the Jewish and Arab populations, as well as with the British authorities. The Arab Revolt of 1936-1939, a resistance against British rule and Jewish immigration, led to the British White Paper of 1939, which proposed a joint Arab-Jewish state. During the revolt, British forces killed over 2,000 Arabs in combat, hanged 108, and attributed the death of 961 to gang and terrorist activities. An analysis by Palestinian historian Walid Khalidi suggests there were approximately 19,792 Arab casualties. Following the Arab Revolt, there were numerous attacks by Jewish paramilitary groups, with the Irgun being one of the most active. Irgun carried out 60 attacks against Palestinian and British targets and was described as a terrorist organization by sources including the New York Times and prominent figures like UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Irgun attacks encompassed assaults on British police stations, assassinations, bombings of transport and infrastructure, as well as strikes against British military and administrative targets. Notable incidents include the 1946 bombing of the King David Hotel, which resulted in 91 deaths, including 28 British citizens, and a series of attacks in 1947 that caused numerous casualties among British, Arab, and Jewish populations. However, the horrific events of the Holocaust during World War II intensified the urgency of the Zionist quest for a sovereign Jewish state. The genocide of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany galvanized international sympathy and support for the Jewish cause. In 1947, the United Nations approved a plan to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Despite Arab rejection of the plan, in 1948, the State of Israel declared independence. The declaration sparked a war with neighboring Arab countries, known as the War of Independence or the Arab-Israeli War. In the ensuing decades, Israel found itself embroiled in a series of conflicts with its neighbors, including the Suez Crisis in 1956, the Six-Day War in 1967, and the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Despite its military victories, the quest for a lasting peace proved elusive. The 1990s brought hope with the Oslo Accords between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, yet lasting peace remained out of reach. The turn of the century saw continued conflict, alongside efforts at dialogue and negotiation. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues to present substantial challenges, primarily due to the ongoing occupation and expansion of settlements in the West Bank. That wraps up our exploration of a rich and complex history. If you found this enlightening and want more content like this, hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to share your views in the comments and share this video with those who love history. Your support helps us bring these historical narratives to light. Subscribe and join us on this journey through time. Thank you for watching.